Okay, so I heard the voice saying recording in progress. Yeah. Okay. I hope the screen is visible to everybody. Okay, great. So this is an image from when widow burning was a legal thing in India, where high caste Hindu widows, not just high caste, all practicing Orthodox Hindu widows were required to uh, immolate themselves in the funeral pyre of their husbands. And it was considered a duty for virtuous women to do so. Now, this is one image, and before that, I'm going to show you two other images. This is one. This is an image from. It's a kind of a folkloric ghosts that is very prevalent in the Bengal region, and this image is from a book which translates to Grandmother's Tales, which is full of fairy tales and folklores of all kinds. These are the sort of pre-modern and pre-colonial ghosts that we usually used to find in Bengali literature. This and like this, this was a sort of a ghost that is sprinkling water with cow dung on the, just on the streets like that. So these ghosts are much different from the kind of spectral figures that I will be talking about through Tagore's short stories. Now, before that, I have prepared a sort of short, longish PPT on the idea of sati and widow burning. And this, as a practice, it was there was a lot of arguments, legal and otherwise, and people who practiced it considered it as a kind of infringement on their customs in their personal lives. And prohibition of the act of sati has been canonized as a kind of moment of woman emancipation, and a lot of missionaries, Christian missionaries, and the British, they kind of took it as a sort of champion of moral and human rights, as a women's rights things. But dissent against it had started in the ground level. Now, this orthodox and predominantly upper caste practice mandated that Hindu widows burn themselves at the funeral pyres. Now, under the religion of Hinduism, there are castes where people are designated certain hierarchies based on the employment that was literally based on jobs that was done by their forefathers. And there are four castes and there are subcastes. The highest castes are the Brahmins, and they have apparently they are the priestly class with the hold over all kinds of religious scriptures, who dictate everything of everything. And there are three other castes in, sort of lower orders. Now, this widow burning, sati, all of this was, while it was mainly meant for upper caste Hindus, a lot of practicing Hindus who were not of these, upper hierarchies also practiced it as a sort of sign of virtue and piety and the good woman practice like that. Now, sati as a colonial civilizing project, along with it became a sort of critique of indigenous traditions, that there's nothing to be proud of in sati. It's something very dehumanizing. More important than this fact is that sati as a practice, it's a part of one of the religious scriptures called the Rig Veda. It has been misinterpreted. And these priestly classes who have been forever entrusted with the task of interpreting the scriptures and God's word, they misinterpret it to suit their own needs. And of course, the female body is always the space for contesting such ideas. Now, it is said that The original writing apparently meant that when the pyre is burning, the woman is going towards the pyre with a lot of incense and flowers and garlands and clarified butter as a sort of offering to the gods or something like that. But these priestly classes, they kind of changed and modified a few words and made it seem like she's offering herself, and that used to be imposed. Now all of this widow burning and sati, all of this happened before sati was officially and legally banned, like all across colonial India. These quotations are from Pandita Ramabai, who was a social reformer from the state of Maharashtra in Western India, who was a social reformer and a sort of champion of women's rights, pushing them towards education and social reform. In one of her seminal works titled The High Caste Hindu Woman, she writes, in no other country is the mother so laden with care and anxiety on the approach of childbirth as in India. In most cases, her hope of winning her husband to herself hangs solely on her bearing sons. Rosaries used by mothers of sons are procured to pray with. There were all kinds of rituals, including certain chantings, which were done so that a son is born during the time period between first and second trimester, all sorts of, bordering on witchcraft. If a girl is born after her brother's death, or if soon after her birth a boy in the family dies, she is in either case regarded by her parents and neighbors as the cause of the boy's death. She is constantly addressed with unpleasant names, slighted, beaten, cursed, persecuted, and despised by all. Marriage is the most expensive of all Hindu festivities and ceremonies. Now, the reason why I'm giving a background about these practices is that this will represent the marginal status of a Hindu widow and how her social position is literally like a living ghost, so to speak. And the short stories where the ones that I've chosen, it is where these half dead women and these living ghosts, they come back to reiterate their stories. It's like they are rewriting their own histories. Now, marriage is the most expensive of all Hindu festivities and ceremonies, where religion enjoins that every girl must be given in marriage. And a neglect of such a duty is unpardonable, and it brings curses on the whole family, the community, the neighbors. I mean, there's a whole community aspect involved in it. The personal is not just what happens inside the four walls. The girl must be married in a fixed period where the caste, all sorts of considerations are made, which leaves the woman with no choice at all. Right from the time she is born to how she is to live the rest of her life, everything is controlled by these patriarchal rituals, and more often than not, the men decided everything. Now, there were also age criteria, and the Brahmin caste of Eastern India have successfully observed and maintained their clan prejudice for hundreds of years, in spite of being very poor, by taking the advantage of polygamy. Now, polygamy as a custom was prevalent in certain subcastes, okay, where a Brahman of a very high clan will marry several women, receiving presents from their parents and, bidding goodbye to all these brides and never return to them. The woman would just keep on waiting for them to return, and they are technically married forever to this one particular man, but the men never come back, and they just go on marrying women from all parts of the country. This particular illustrious Brahmin does not need to bother himself with the care of supporting these wives, because the parents always pledge to maintain the daughter, because at the end of the day, first of all, she is married, and she is married to someone of a very high stature. So this is all that matters. And she's living, literally like a sorry, literally living a virgin life under the roof of her parents. And since she's married to someone of a higher caste, she and her family is already blessed by the gods. Ramabai also writes that it's not easy to determine when the childhood of a Hindu girl ends and the married life begins. According to Manu, now Manu is a part of one of those sages who wrote the ancient scriptures. Now there are 24 or 25 religious books, and Manu is considered a kind of sacrosanct for his extremely regressive views on women and how they should live, and the duty of a woman towards the family, the community, the husband, etc. And of all the scriptures and all the writers of these scriptures, Manu takes the cake literally in all his regressive views and his ideas of how a woman should behave, and things like a woman should only bear sons, and if she's not able to, then the husband has the liberty to find another woman who will bear sons. Now, according to this person, Manu, 8 to 12 years is the age range, the marriageable age for a high caste Hindu girl to get married. And 12 was considered to be very old. So it's like when she's born, her marriage is fixed to someone of a social stature that matches her or is higher than her. Now there was also a practice known as dowry, which was involved, and it in its modern form it exists in other benign ways, and it's blatant in others, where after when on getting married, the bride's family gives a lot of money and riches and wealth and property and everything, all of that, to the uh, family of the man. Now, even though Manu had said that 24 years is the minimum marriageable age for a young man, the popular custom defies the law. Boys of 10 and 12 were married to girls of 7 and 8 years of age. Throughout India, widowhood is regarded as the punishment for a horrible crime or crimes committed by the woman in her former existence upon earth. The Orthodox Hinduism that I'm talking about, it believes in a cycle of karma, of your previous sins affecting your current life, and what you do now will affect the next. So widowhood is kind of considered a punishment for horrible crimes the woman has done. She probably murdered her husband in the previous life or was barren. So probably that's why she's a widow now. If the widow be a mother of sons, she is not that an object of pity, even though she's still a sinner. But widow mothers of daughters are treated with much less respect and sometimes with a lot of hatred. And especially so when this widow's daughters are not married off. And much more than that, given the age of these young mothers and the age at which they are supposed to be married, even the children of these young widows were becoming widows in a way, because they were getting married off young and the husbands were old and they were dying. So it's a endless cycle of penury and a cycle of shame. This rite of child marriage left many a girl a widow before she knew what marriage was. The duties of a widow are thus described in the code of Manu. At her pleasure, let her emaciate her body by living on pure flowers, roots, and fruit, but she must never even mention the name of another man after her husband has died. Until death, let her be patient of hardship, self controlled and chaste, and strive to fulfill that most excellent duty which is prescribed for wives who have one husband only. Nor is a second husband anywhere prescribed for virtuous women. So, these are just a few examples of the codes of conduct that a Hindu widow should maintain in order to preserve her chastity and her, virtue and the virtue of the family and everything. The cruelty of social customs does not stop here. Among the Brahmins of Deccan, Deccan means the southern part of India, heads of all widows must be shaved regularly every fortnight. Some of the lower castes too have adopted this custom of shaving widows' heads. There is a lot of caste and class discrimination, and it is mostly the higher caste and classes which make a lot of attempts to preserve their idea of a pure clan, race, community, or whatever it is. But given the idea of um, given the idea of you know receiving something good from the god, of receiving God's blessing if you pursue these practices, these caste practices also percolated among the lower castes and classes. So in marriage they may not be united, but when it came to these practices there was a very strange kind of unity. The widow must wear a single coarse garment, white, red, or brown. Red is also not really desirable because red signifies the color of vitality, fertility, and the color of lust, so to speak. And red is also a kind of bindi that women wear on their foreheads, and red vermilion on their hair. So that's a mark of marriage. So a lot of women, they completely refuse to wear red or even keep anything red on themselves. She must eat one meal only during the 24 hours of a day, never take part in family feasts and jubilees, not show herself to people on auspicious occasions. Many widows refuse to, visit marriages or people's houses during some occasions. And this is something that is observed in widows even today. Like many well to do families have widows who abide by certain rules. She is closely confined to the house, forbidden to associate with her female friends as often as she wishes. No man except her father, brother, uncles, and her aunt cousins are allowed to see or speak with her. This confinement to the house, she is not just required to perform household chores, but she often takes on the role of being a kind of mother to the children of the house. And these children often have had mothers who have died due to childbirth or some other disease, or maybe, committed suicide or whatever. So these widows, even though they might have been childless themselves, they were often uh, supposed to take on roles of mothers to other children. So the only alternative before her was to either commit suicide or accept a life of infamy and shame. Now, perhaps the most obvious motive of social rejection of Hindu widows was to guarantee their disclaimer upon family property. The share in family property could have been denied any time at home with a strict disciplining of the woman folk. It's how patriarchy operates. There are men, then there are patriarchal women. Oftentimes, women who have suffered the same fate would force other women to follow their own path so that they don't get claim to the property. Widows were often left in a single room away from the house with a whole system of her own so that the husbands of the house do not come in touch with her in any way. This was done to ensure sanctity of the married woman's family and to prevent the husband from going astray, or to prevent some curse falling on him from a possible jealousy of the widow. Hindu law never granted any right to property for women, more so to the ones without legal masters who were the husbands. Now, all of this incidents and all these rituals and rites and all of this were happening before legal reforms came into place. Before property acts and marriage rights, all of this were reformed. Now, coming to the Bengali Hindus. Now, why am I coming to the Bengali Hindus? It is this crowd of people is the subject of Tagore's stories, short stories. Now, I did cite Pandita Ramabai from Maharashtra and her her take on the rules of Hinduism, that is pan India. There are certain things that that began with the Bengali Hindu community, people from Bengal. They had contributed towards the exclusion program of widows in a very unique way. They isolated these widows in a very physical manner away from home and sent to places of pilgrimage like Varanasi, Vrindavan, Mathura, and Navadvip. These were centers of pilgrimage, of holy grounds, holy sites, and Varanasi is known to be the place where a lot of Hindus, devout Orthodox Hindus, go to be cremated by the rivers. It's considered to be sacred, considered to be holy, and whatever sins you've committed in this life will, get washed away if you get cremated over there. So that particular space has a lot of religious, spiritual significance and also economic significance for this particular community, because a lot of widows live there, and also given the fact that after a point of time their families stopped keeping track of them and they had no right to property and they were not allowed to be in social spaces, they had to find out other ways of living, one of which included prostitution. Which is why Varanasi, even though it is a spiritual city and people always make attempts to purify its spaces with chantings and incense and holy waters and all of that, widows who live there or women who live there and have made the difficult choice of getting into prostitution are looked down upon, even though their social condition is an effect of patriarchal institutions that give these spiritual places its supposed spirituality. Now, a pilgrim place ensured the religious commitment of the Bengali male populace. Temples were raised and ashrams were funded at pilgrim places. Liberal donations of well to do Bengalis, which were initially made for religious fervor, it died out, and of course, these widows were, to say the least, living ghosts. Now I am going to start with the short story of the skeleton. Okay, yeah. So the story is about a young man's encounter with the ghost of a woman looking for her skeleton. She narrates how her youth was being wasted away, only to be briefly revived by an unspoken promise of a relationship with a young doctor who was her brother's friend. But this doctor chose to marry another woman with the prospect of a handsome dowry. Now, we have seen how this short story begins. We have the narrator sleeping in a room, and suddenly he hears, and that room used to have this particular skeleton, and he feels this presence in this room. And even though he sort of has goosebumps, which the narrator obviously does not talk about, he seems to engage humorously with this spirit woman. One of the first things to note is how this spirit woman does not have a name. She's just literally like a free spirit, but looking for her skeleton. She says that I'm looking for my body, I'm looking for my skeleton, where 24 years of my life I had spent in that cage. And the a part of from a circular sort of bones from my chest was there. So essentially she means I'm looking for my heart. It's like, and as I've mentioned before, the woman's body was the always the site. And she this particular body of hers, even though she left the corporeal realm long back, it's like her body needs to be reascribed. Nobody tells her story, so she has to, walk around empty halls and rooms looking for her body to talk about herself. This doctor who chose to marry another woman, it was for a handsome dowry. Now, the class of doctors and the sort of educated Bengali men that we talk about, that is called the Bhadralok class. Okay, that class is a product of uh, a sort of leeching from British profits. And when Calcutta was the capital of when Calcutta was the capital, it this particular class was born out of it. The taking advantage of the investment of capital made by the British in Kolkata. So this particular class is, while even though they were supposedly modern and progressive, reading all kinds of Western philosophies, spiritualism, and all of that, their moral standing and ideas about relationships and a sort of, how shall I put it, their ideas of personal morality were still stuck on very regressive values. They would choose to marry certain castes, look down upon other castes, and this very privileged idea of learning, of merit, and of mm, purity, purity of uh, certain, and the domination in certain fields and of certain castes. So even though this doctor, and the sign of a doctor is the hint in the story of is the class position of this doctor. He's and a lot of and Another interesting development was the subcaste of Bengalis who chose to be doctors. They were often untouchables. They were also called untouchables because since they were doctors, they had to treat people across all social classes, and they had to touch dead bodies of all kinds of people, which is why, even though the profession was sort of noble in its way, people who practiced it, and they were viewed as next to God, but still there was a niggling fear about their purity. They were sort of defiled in people's minds in some way or the other. Now, this doctor who was supposed to be a liberated man of the Renaissance, he just chose to marry another woman because he would be getting a larger sum of money for marrying her. He did not even tell this female narrator that he had chosen someone else. It seemed like he was hiding something. He was constantly, being shifty and not answering her. And she came to know about this marriage only a few hours before he was slinking off into the night to marry that woman. So, as a revenge, and with the hope of reuniting with him after death, she poisons his drink and she ingests the same. The idea was that she wanted to reunite with him in a sort of an imagined afterlife. She waits decked in wedding finery under the tree in their garden. And instead of being with her man in an imagined afterlife, her skeleton is meant for display and poked about by budding medical professionals. You see her body, which and her whole existence, which was already very marginalized to begin with, her hopes of an escape it's once again thwarted. It's she just she was dominated by men her entire life, and even after death her body is up for inspection for for these men to learn and poke around. Okay. Okay, there's the second short story. Okay, it's the way it's written in Bengali. I put that part in italics, and I haven't written dead or alive because that her status is very dubious, and that is the whole crux of the story. And these Gothic stories of Tagore, the sense of the supernatural and the social evils that were the product of these bad practices and customs of Orthodox Hindus, all of these came into play and were resolved or were represented in a stronger way only in this particular format. So this particular story traces the trajectory of a Hindu widow whose name was Kadambini, who survives sati only to commit suicide because of her own family's disbelief and inability to take her back since she was assumed dead. Now, Kadambani survived the funeral pyre because it was raining, and when she awoke and she was sitting on the pyre, the cremation ground was completely empty. There was nobody around. There were wolves and I think hyenas also howling around. And after getting over the shock of it, even though she was completely baffled and disoriented, she decided to seek shelter in her only friend's house, which was quite some miles away. Her friend Jogomaya and her husband Sripati welcomed her, but there was a sort of boundary, there was a sort of an invisible wall between her and the family and the couple rather. Tagore writes that it felt that death separated the two women, and Kadambini never tells her what she has survived. She not only didn't want to scare them, but also the fact that she was a widow, they might just throw her away or try to burn her again. You never know. Her presence started feeling very suspicious to this particular couple, and the friend told her that she should go back to her in-laws. It's been a number of days, but she was but her response was, I do not know if I belong to you people. I do not know where I belong. And you all seem to be leading your lives, living your lives. You are all laughing and making merry, but I don't seem to identify with any of it. So it's like she's in a very spectral position, and even though she's a widow and she survived the pyre, it's like she's now very alienated from her own self. And it was a rainy night, and this couple, they lay in bed arguing about their next course of action, what to do about her, how shall how should they just kick her out gently, basically. And then Kadambini overhears them, and in a very horrific display and a very dramatic display, barges into the bedroom declaring that I am your friend Kadambini, but I'm not alive anymore. I'm dead. If I don't have a place in this world or the other, where do I go then? This line that she delivers, it sort of echoes the situation of a lot of Hindu widows of that time. They don't have a place anywhere. And the fact that they had to wear white clothes and a lot of them had shaved heads, and they looked very emaciated. They literally represented a lot of, very horrific figures. Then she leaves behind this fainted couple and reaches her old house after a day. She goes back to the house where she lived when she was, before she died, basically. And on reaching her house, she peeps into her old room to find her brother in law's beloved son murmuring in his sleep and suffering a high fever. I explained before how widows of the house had to take on maternal duties and maternal roles, and had to often, it was a kind of a sympathy role, a role given to them out of sympathy, that okay, let her at least be near the child, even though a lot of women objected to her presence near the children because she might cast a spell or a kind of a proverbial witch figure. Now, on seeing this uh, crying child, not crying, murmuring, he was ill, she starts feeling very maternal. And that is the moment she realizes that she only felt very out of place in her friend's house, because after all, it was the house of another woman, her own hearth, her own family. She of course will not be feeling anything over there. And she tries to get close to this boy, and she used to take care of him before when she was a part of the family. And before anything happens, one of the domestic workers of the house discovers her presence, who and lets out a shriek, and then she just faints. The in-laws and other members of the house rush in to see what is going on, and it's a horrific scene as they see their dead woman, the dead daughter-in-law, literally coming back to life. This father in law even proposes an elaborate set of rituals to get rid of her so that she just leaves the young boy alone. Now, in this, there's a lot of rituals associated with Hindu customs and spiritual practices that involves a lot of ceremonies and a lot of, burning certain things and chantings to ensure that the soul of the dead reaches where it should. And in cases such as where it's assumed that the dead has possessed the living, there are rituals for that too, which borders on, uh, on the, practices of witchcraft and all of that. And this and not all rituals are meant for everybody. It's evident that Kadumbini, this particular woman, belonged to a higher social status, higher caste, as a result of which her father in law could actually afford to say that we will have an elaborate set of rituals to get rid of you. We think that you are dead, but you are coming here to take away our son. He's the only one in the family who will carry on the line. So just leave him alone and just go away. And she was desperate to prove, and she was, very confounded, desperate to prove that she's alive. She hits her head with a bowl lying nearby and rushes out of the room. The sound of splashing water insinuates the idea that she commits suicide by jumping into the pond. And the story ends with the line that by dying again, Kadumbini proves that she is alive. And her death is also, kind of left as a suggestion that she may have committed suicide. You don't see her jumping into the pool, you just hear a splash. So everything about her existence, right from her original death at the pyre to her short 2 days living, or living in the friend's house and visit to this house, it's all shrouded in mystery. It's somewhere, it's not of this world, and it's also not a part of what happened. Maybe it's like saying that, all these people, they will at some point they will just think that, oh, this had happened, but we're not sure if it really happened. It is a very, it's something very uncanny, which they will probably brush it off as a dissatisfied soul, uh, which had, who was roaming around just to seek revenge on them. Okay. Yeah. This is this is the final short story of Mahamaya. Uh, this is the story of how an intercaste couple is separated and the woman married off to an older, and by older I mean very old. The man was in his deathbed, who died the next day because the uncle of this woman did not want her marrying him. And so he got her married off to this old man so that she becomes a widow and essentially never gets to marry anybody else ever again. Anything to prevent her marriage to this man he never didn't like. She, the man who he was supposed to be married, the guy, the one who was her lover, he was at a loss of words, and his thoughts seemed to be oscillating between taking his own life and leaving his job and going back to his own village. After hearing that this woman not only attained widowhood, but she also became a sati. She just wanted to she just wanted to kill herself. And the surprise happens when he suddenly sees her in the room, and he's not just taken aback, he is scared and shocked to the point of not speaking. It's like he's in a trance, and he's even more shocked at what she says. She tells him that I have literally come back from the dead. I can live with you, which again was very frowned upon. I can live with you, but only if you promise to never take the veil off my face. I can move in and we can start living in together, but only if you abide by this condition. Now, if you do not agree to it, I can leave the house at this moment and never come back, and you are never going to even try to find me again. Since he was very lovelorn, and of course they were in love, he agreed to the condition and they started living in together. But they, and by living I mean they lived in separate rooms. And then one night, uh, he had this terrible urge to see what is underneath that veil, and he just takes her veil away, and her half burnt face is discovered over there. And she finds that very offensive and humiliating, and then she just leaves him forever. Now, there's a significance to this particular title, Mahamaya. Now, Maya is illusion, and Mahamaya is a part of those older traditions of uh, rituals, or the idea of Shakti, or the idea of power. And Mahamaya is the dark mother. She is the one who lives on cremation grounds, and the one who is, it's all sort of associations with a necrophilia in a way. It's at that part of the spiritual canon where practitioners are required to be in cremation grounds, and they have all these prayers, and apparently after a point of time you can see the dead souls walking around you. They all come back to life, and since oftentimes in cremation grounds, not all body parts get burned properly. So apparently, there are skeletons walking around, and practitioners have to sit still and not be afraid because that shows their trust in the higher power. And it is that power which prevents them from being negatively affected by the negative vibrations of these undead. So, in this particular, out of the three short stories, two of them have names for the women. And this last one, Mahamaya, it is literally, how she is back from the cremation ground, the dark power, and how she is not suitable in a domestic life, if one thinks of it that way. Yeah, and these were my sources, just putting it out. So when I was showing these images, so these ghosts that I talked about, they are much different from these. They are the pre-colonial, the pre-modern ones, and they were mostly folklore. The ones, short stories that started from around the late 19th, early 20th centuries, they talked about social evils, and it also showed the influence of the Theosophical Society and occult practices that talked about bringing back the dead, and the change of a medium, where the medium was not just a person trying to communicate with the dead, but also this medium became inventions, scientific inventions such as the telephone. And that happened around the early 20th, mid 20th centuries. Yeah, so, and that would be the end of this short stories.